Very warm welcome, Tanveer, and great to see you again. Obviously, a
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Sunil. It's always good to be here with the Social Beat team.
Absolutely, and I think we've had many discussions with you both in person and virtual. I think thanks to the current scenario, all our leadership summits have moved online now, but hopefully at some point later this year we can do in-person visits as well. But briefly, Tanveer, let me introduce you to our audience. Tanveer is the Director of Agency Partnerships and Sales, GCS at Google, and has been a leader helping brands scale up significantly over the last few years. Tanveer has also graduated from the Duke University in the US, and I think he has experience both in sports media with IMG, with the Times Network, and with Fever FM. So I think not just digital experience, Tanveer, you've been a stalwart in the marketing industry, building brands across. So super excited to have you again with us today. So I think, just to get started, Tanveer, obviously the D2C revolution is very much in India now with very large funding rounds. We've had Shark Tank as well recently, which has been a revolution in terms of making D2C discussions happen across India. Looking back, where do you see the inflection point for the D2C revolution in India? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So Tanveer, actually the question was around, that the D2C revolution has really started in India, with Shark Tank recently as well. Every household and the Saas Bahu discussions have been replaced with D2C and CAC, So looking back, where do you see this inflection point for the D2C revolution in India?
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite an evolution in content, right? From Saas Bahu serials all the way down to Shark Tanks, right? But that's an interesting question. The way I'd look at it, Sunil, is I would say that the D2C revolution is probably divided into three parts. I'd probably divide the D2C revolution into three parts: pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and post-pandemic, right? I think there's a little bit of a myth that it's all started off during the pandemic, but the reality of it is that the D2C revolution actually kicked in pre-pandemic as well, right? There were large conglomerates, some data-driven companies that wanted to kind of go ahead and connect with their customers directly, build on first-party data, increase their engagement. So that had actually started off well before the pandemic. What eventually did happen is that the pivot happened when the commerce growth really started coming in during the pandemic phase, right? That really expedited it. And that need for us to actually go ahead and develop one-on-one relationships just got probably even more cemented with the commerce growth that we actually saw during the pandemic phase as well. So I would say the inflection point was clearly the pandemic. The inflection point was the escalation or the growth in terms of large e-commerce adoption that followed in every sector possible, and D2C sector obviously benefited immensely about it. And if I was to draw a parallel just in terms of a data point, right, like direct to consumer or D2C brand queries actually rose by around 533% as a business. So brands rose almost 533% of a business as customers moved online with respect to consumer needs. And I think it was very beautifully called out by a Deloitte survey in 2021, which said that consumers are expecting more than just packages, right? They're actually expecting relationships, right? And they expect the brand to actually know why we bought an X product from that brand. So that's the level of connect that they've expected. And the D2C brands have actually capitalized on this belief and this urge that customers have had. And finally, I think the stat that we could possibly keep in mind again is the fact that almost, I think in the next 4 years there's expected to be a 200 million increase in terms of online shoppers, right? And that's probably why VCs and the whole bunch of startups going after D2C brands, etc. So there's ample data to show that, hey, there was a start pre-pandemic, inflection during pandemic, and it's here to stay and probably continue.
No, definitely, Tanveer, completely agree. And I think from our personal experience as well, today we don't buy a product. I think it's more closely connected with the identity, and we're also looking at the experience which the brand is able to deliver. Do you see this more as an urban phenomena with like citizens in the metros adopting D2C brands, or are you also seeing this happen across smaller towns in India?
Sunil, it brings me back to a discussion that I think Vikas and I had almost a year back, right? On the emergence of Bharat, if you remember, in one of your events, right? And I think that it's a shift that's here to stay within metros, as well as the growth will come from probably urban India, right? So again, if you were to look, and it's a factor of, so let's divide it into two parts. I think within urban India at this point of time, what's happening is there are options available to consumers. So consumers are moving from brand A to brand B to brand C. And as more come in, there'll possibly be an interchange of consumers or a swapping of consumers that will happen. But that's an opportunity for all D2C brands. But at the same point of time, if you are really going to see growth, if you need net new consumers coming in, that's going to come from rural India, right? That's from your Bharat audiences per se. And if you were to go draw parallels to any platform or any business which is seeing net new consumers, whether it be YouTube, whether it be GPay, our net new consumers are now coming from Bharat. But at the same point of time, it's important to build the loyalty within urban India as well. And hence, I think it will depend a lot on the brand and at what stage they're at. Early stage D2Cs will possibly see immediate growth in rural, but they'll compete in urban India. The ones that have actually been around for a bit will possibly be consolidating even further in urban India because their products have become stronger, their marketing has been better, they've been better known, their brand recall is probably higher, and continue to add in rural India as well. So I think it's going to be a mix and match of most of this that's going to happen in terms of net new from rural and consolidation in urban.
Right, and I think we do see that across the brands we work with as well at Social Beat. Growth is happening for different brands in different geographies, and it's really exciting to see which products are taking off in which geographies, faster. I think we also have a lot of founders and D2C teams here, Tanvi. A lot of them are looking to scale quickly and have been running a lot of performance campaigns, including at Google at scale, including shopping, search. How do you see like brand building versus performance campaigns, and building that narrative around your brand and investing there? What is your perspective for a D2C founder or team to follow?
I think that's the story of every sales conversation we have with any sort of a brand, don't we? And I don't think it's limited only to D2C brands. It also applies to a whole bunch of traditional brands, etc. as well. I think the analogy I'll draw is our consumer buying patterns, right? It's no longer a straight line. It's no longer linear, right? Like if I was to draw a parallel in terms of what our consumer behaviors online are, they search for a product, they research for a product on YouTube, they watch a how-to video, then they go ahead and review it again. It's no longer one straight line. It's a to and fro that continuously tends to happen, right? And I think that's what the opportunity is, that no longer are consumers looking at any one. So no longer should brands be looking at any one channel to go ahead and acquire consumers and drive ROI, right? Performance has its clear advantages and it needs to be an always on, right? It will give you continuity if I look at it. But at the same point of time, brand, if used incorrectly, is a waste of money, right? So the way I put it is, if you were to go and do sporadic brand campaigns, you will definitely see spikes, right? You will see a sudden burst of new consumers coming in, but you will very quickly drop down to ground zero again, which was what your base was eventually, right? And I think that's where always on brands really comes into play as well. How do you start differentiating the impact that brand campaigns will drive to you over a long term? And you need to define your long-term basis your business need. It could be 6 months, it could be 1 year, it could be 5 years, depending on where you are on the journey. But I'd urge most brands to look at investments in performance and brand as complementary rather than in silos, because gone are the days where you plan independently. So I think that's number one. And more importantly, there is ample proof of the fact that, and I'll quote an Interbrand report that had actually come out, which basically said something in the lines of, companies that have focused on the importance of their brand over the last 5 years have seen that the value of their brand has been 2.4 times more than those who didn't, right? So there is ample proof of, either via data, either via reports, or brands adjacent to you as well. Look at the new D2C, some of the older D2C brands, right? Look at Mamaearth, classic case, right? They continued on performance. It was about selling their product, but they never dropped the ball on brand. And that's been critical. Look at some of these, like D2C brands that came into a space which was unknown. Meat selling, for example, Licious, right? Fresh to home. This was a space that you and I probably didn't think would ever emerge in this thing. But what they did was, it was about getting products sold, and that to a perishable commodity, sold very quickly. But they went ahead and leveraged the fact that it was about the right logistics, the right timing, how quickly you could deliver, how fresh the meat was. And eventually that brand story is what resulted in the customer.
Having some technical issues. I think to Tanvi's point, what we have also seen, and talking to venture capitalists, is that most of the value is accrued to brands which are able to build that brand story with users, and it's not just performance campaigns. So a lot of VCs, once founders do raise funding as well, we see that the shift moves from just performance campaigns to also investing in brand campaigns and building that brand narrative, investing in influencer marketing. Hey, Tanvi, have you back?
Hi, sorry.
No problem at all. So I was just sharing that even VCs, like the few VCs we work with closely in the D2C space, their first mandate when brands raise investment from them is to actually start investing in branding and not just focus on performance campaigns, because after a certain point of time your performance campaigns will start capping out and you will not be able to grow your brand. I think very interestingly, Tanvi, you brought up Licious and the category which people were not searching for earlier online, right? It was a very new category. Yep. How do you recommend to like founders, who are entering new areas where there's no demand today, there's no search? How should they go about building that new category? And what are some of the learnings from players like Licious? There are a few other categories as well which have done that very well.
Sunil, I don't think there's a straight answer or a complete clear formula to this, right? It's a little bit of trial and error. It's a little bit of learning along the way as well. That comes into play when, especially for categories which are relatively unknown, right? In the online space as well. And these two examples which we spoke about are probably classic cases, right? So I think at the very beginning, companies need to probably make a few of these educated guesses, right, with respect to what works for them, what could impact them. Could a political shift, would that possibly go ahead and impact them in the future? Would there be some emerging technology in the future that could possibly impact them? Could there be an unfortunate pandemic of this nature that could possibly impact them? And hence, the reason I'm saying that is they need to think of planning their strategy basis eventualities that you possibly haven't seen, right? And hence, it becomes extremely critical that they do a bit of soul searching, where you actually decide as to how do you go ahead and deploy your dollars, right? Whether you can deploy it all into performance. Do you need to start building your brand quickly so that in case there's a situation of this nature, you're able to go ahead and retain share and retain top of mind, and this continuity remains. I mean, classic case, right? During the pandemic as well, I'm sure Licious was impacted as a business, but the reality of it is the orders continued as long as the logistics were in place, right? As long as there were no lockdowns, the orders continued. Why? Because they possibly had built a strong brand for themselves as well, and kudos for them to have been able to do that. So I guess it's a little bit of learning along the way as well, and as you kind of move into newer geographies, what may have worked in a previous geography may not necessarily have worked in a new emerging one that's coming up in the future as well. So I unfortunately don't have a straight answer in terms of what would work, but I would definitely say that watch out for consumer behaviors, watch out for patterns, watch out for trends that go ahead and impact them positively, which you then leverage to go ahead and build your marketing strategy going forward.
Absolutely, Tanvi. I think we also have Makul joining us later from Licious to share a bit about their journey. I think also we've seen this at both, right? I think it could be looked at as a very commoditized market, but I think they're also investing in brand, looking at trends and finding that gap has really helped them, now like apply for IT.
And I think boat has probably been one at the forefront, and kudos to Daman and team for having done this, that they've actually gone ahead and also innovated a lot via content, right? It's about, it wasn't only about the product, it wasn't only about the price point, but it's also about communicating how cool their product looks, right? And the options that they have within it as well. So I think they went ahead and leveraged this a lot differently, where it wasn't necessarily only about price points. All said and done, speakers were available, right? Earpieces were available, but at the end of the day, pods were available. What they went ahead and beautifully did is complemented all this, say that, hey, I have options for you. I have it at the right price point, and I have it available everywhere. So that communication was so beautifully done, and kudos to him to have pulled this off so effectively, and to you folks for having supported them so brilliantly as well.
Thank you. I think it's been a joint journey with the team at Google as well. I still remember like 3.5, 4 years back, we went to the small office of both in horse cars in Delhi, and we're like, they've come a long way, but I think the different thought process of investing in the brand and, building that from day zero, I think that's definitely helped both, stand out in a
Yeah. And the whole bunch of brands. Okay, LiveSpace as well, right? I mean, classic case. Who would have ever imagined that you'd be doing interior designing online and then eventually going ahead and moving it down on ground as well? So the whole bunch of brands that have chartered this uncharted territory and been relatively successful in it.
No, definitely, Tanvi. Have you seen, I think YouTube also has scaled up a lot over the last few years. Are you seeing the D2C brands leverage this well, more for the top of the funnel or even for conversions? How is the video asset creation process been, for the D2C brands?
I think it's a mix now, and I was talking to Rohan, who works with you folks very closely, and he gave me a very interesting line, right, before I connected on this call. He says that, Tanvi, can you guess what are the 3 behavior patterns that have actually changed since the COVID? And I said, no, tell me. It may be different for me, but it actually was relevant. One was sleeping, the second was working, and the third was watching videos. Right, and you think about it, it is what it is. That is a fact, and that in fact is where YouTube really kind of fits in beautifully. So while video consumption has obviously just skyrocketed with data having become cheaper, that's where YouTube fits in, very beautifully as well. And similar to your first question, right? I think where consumers we need to kind of understand is that as they don't go ahead and buy in a linear fashion, they don't go ahead and consume content in a linear fashion as well. And hence, it's important for you that you make sure that your brand, the consumer is aware of the brand or of the product, is considering your new product, and is also taking action. And YouTube is no longer only about brand building. It is both upper funnel, but it's also where the penny drops eventually, right? Because that's where you go ahead and use performance products on YouTube as well. And if I was to just kind of refer to, let's say, the Ipsos study that was out a couple of years back, 70% of YouTube viewers say that YouTube makes them more aware about new brands. So great for consideration. And then 50% of shoppers say that online video helped them decide which specific brand to go ahead and buy, right? So which again made it, extremely high from a retention perspective, that the video was really impacting their buying behavior. And 70% of YouTube viewers say that they bought a brand as a result of seeing a YouTube video, right? Which then is eventual conversion, right? So I think gone are the days when you look at it probably entirely from upper funnel. You can definitely continue doing that, but you can additionally also go ahead and leverage it effectively for conversions and performances as well.
No, completely agree, Tanvi. I think even the storytelling and the messaging today, I think while text still is there, and you have voice also starting to happen, video is now the de facto way to communicate. I think most people
seeing is believing, right? So Sunil, seeing is believing. So at the end of the day, I think that's where the art of storytelling fits in beautifully on YouTube. Different bites of videos, different versions of it, plethora of content. It just is a win-win for most brands.
No, definitely. Tanvi. And from a future lens perspective, where do you see the D2C space evolving? Even from Google or the consumer insights, I would love to hear your thoughts on the industry's path forward. Are you seeing D2C brands expand internationally? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I'd actually love to learn from the founders as well as to where do they think this is going to go. But in my view, I'd kind of divide this broadly into 3 broad headers in terms of what we could watch out for or what we could leverage. One is obviously business critical for any D2C brand, which is reaching the right consumer, right? So the reality of it being that there are new medias getting added constantly. Connected TV is a big one, right? And a massive one. There's a 25 million plus opportunity right now when it comes to connected TV just in India alone, and it's growing very rapidly, right? So I think the question is, are we leveraging that well enough? Reach, diversified reach via platforms like JMP, DV360 become very, very important. I don't think D2C brands have completely kind of captured that yet. Massive opportunity. So I would say reaching the right consumer or at scale would be an important one. The second one is once you reach them, interacting with them, right? So can you be the differentiator when it comes to interacting with these consumers, right? Can you be seen as one that has a top of mind recall just because of the way you communicated or interacted with them. And that's where something like an AR VR integration into your creative piece, your content piece, right, either via mobile devices, becomes very, very critical, right? So I think that's going to be a key. So interaction, your mode of interaction and innovation via content is going to be a key one. And the third one, which we see now D2C brands kind of venturing towards, is market expansion, right? We've seen a wave of D2C brands right now within India, okay? But if you see the way export as a business and a number of government initiatives are helping grow export as a business opportunity, it's massive, right? There were roughly around $500 billion worth of goods and services exported from India in the last fiscal year, right? Which was around 25% of the GDP, okay? But more importantly, as per a KPMG study, the forecast was that $50 billion of this export was influenced by digital, right? So I think that's the catch. You are a D2C brand, you're already very strong on digital. $50 billion worth of business is being influenced by digital possibly. So massive opportunity already existing on the table, which will only grow the way digital is growing as a media. So I think if you really want to go ahead and move out, probably due to a pressurized market, if I was to say, a very competitive market, and find a sweet spot which possibly will be your territory, then export is an area that you possibly need to look at. And that's where I think you and I can help the brands really kind of explore such opportunities with respect to interest on their products or categories.
Definitely, Tanvi. I think Google also has a separate team now, and we've been working closely on the international expansion. And I think we already have some case studies in the industry now, like Badam Teas and brands which are going global. Right. And I think those are going to be inspiration for founders and teams here. And I think a very insightful discussion, Tanvi. I think running out of your time on your calendar, but I think I had a lot to take away, especially on thinking of brand and performance jointly, and thinking of it as always on and how it can drive performance there. And I think your aspect on the connected TVs, 25 million connected TVs. So it's not today just mobile and desktop, but you're also looking at connected TVs and probably other screens in the future as well. So I think it's a very exciting time for D2C founders. Any final message you'd like to share with the founders and teams here?
I would just urge each one of them to keep engaging with Google as well. Sometimes insights from them prompt us to come out with more creative solutions as well. Coincidentally, yesterday we were in an insight session with an EV brand which was actually presenting to us. We weren't presenting. And it was so insightful that it's actually made us think a bit differently in terms of how EV brands could evolve from a Google strategy. So keep sharing with us. We learn from you, and we'll possibly be able to help you kind of expedite your journey towards growth in the future as well. But thank you so much, Sunil, for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be part of the summits that you folks host.
No, thank you, Tanvi. I think the humility, despite the contribution in the economy and society, I think you, Meenakshi, Rohan, I think amazing support, and thanks to Shalini as well. I think it's been a joy to work with the Google team, and I think all our clients will also vouch for that, that we continue the journey of scaling up together. Thank you so much, Tanvi.
Thanks, Sunil. Take care.